Excellent. We have lots and lots of people. So welcome everyone to the London Federation of Green Parties monthly meeting. And today we have got a session on climate action, social justice and recovery, which is absolutely crucial at this particular moment as we're emerging from lockdown, but we are and kind of looking ahead to what may be happening over the next months. And certainly in my job as a London Assembly member at City Hall, sorry, I should have introduced myself, I'm Caroline Russell, we are finding, are you all hearing the sort of bell going off all the time? Or not? No? Good.
Yep.
Excellent.
We'll be waiting to be admitted.
That's marvellous. Can my co-host please admit all the people who need admitting so that they get in easily? We are going to hear from our three speakers who I will be introducing in just a moment. But before we start, I just wanted to start off with a couple of housekeeping things. First of all, many thanks to Lois Davis for setting up this meeting and doing all the background work to make sure that we have such a great lineup of speakers. In terms of, you're all very organised, you've all got your microphones on mute, which is excellent. If you want to ask a question, please put your question in the chat. You've got, there should be some thumbs up and reactions that you can use. Thumbs up and clapping if you sort of clap hands, emojis if you want to respond and give some feedback to your speakers while they're speaking. Because I can tell you it's quite weird doing giving a speech to a screen full of little images and getting a little bit of feedback is can be really helpful while you're going along. So that's it. Microphones on mute, questions in the chat, and do use the hands up function as well. Actually no, we don't even need the hands up function because we've got questions in the chat, so that's all good. So I am going to tell you who we've got this evening, and I'll introduce them one at a time as they speak. We have Sarah Woolley, who is going to be speaking first. We then have Ruth London from Fuel Poverty Action, and then we've got Julian Dean, who will be speaking third, who is a Green Party councillor on Shropshire Council and works with the Green Party to support climate action. But first of all, Sarah Woolley, who is the Secretary General of the Bakers Food and Allied Workers Union, and she's going to be focusing on climate change as a trade union issue and the role we can play in ensuring that the recovery doesn't have a negative impact on workers. So Sarah, if I can hand over to you, and are you able to unmute yourself, or do I need to do that as
I've done it, it's fine.
You've done it, excellent.
Thank you, Caroline, and thank you for the invitation to speak this evening. I'm going to apologise in advance. I was literally sat there thinking, please print a stop printing before I had to take myself off mute. It's my first day back after annual leave, and it's been pretty full on today. The joys of being the General Secretary amid COVID. So I wanted to talk to you about some of the work we've been doing as a union over the last few years around climate change. Don't get me wrong, we're nowhere near where I'd like us to be as an organisation, but we were very much standing from a standing start. Many of our members really didn't understand why climate change was a trade union issue. We'd had a couple of motions against fracking at our annual conference, but other than that, we didn't really have anything environmental or green on the agenda. And we kind of knew we needed to do something more, but what really kind of catapulted it was I moved a motion at TUC Congress on climate change, talking about the need for energy democracy, the need for organisations to be greener and it not be on the backs of workers, the need for green reps to be recognised as shop stewards, health and safety reps and ULRs are. And we knew, we worked alongside PCS and TUED, Trade Unions for Energy Democracy, in that motion. And when it passed, it was the first time at TUC Congress that all the unions had come together and actually agreed a motion like that. It was quite historical, but we knew we couldn't just then carry on as we were prior to that. So we began engaging members. And we looked at what we could do to engage them and how we could get them to understand that climate change is a trade union issue. We knew that our members weren't really the type of members that would listen to podcasts, wouldn't necessarily engage in webinars, although, you know, life has changed since then and maybe they would do a lot more these days. So we kind of created a newsletter, but we recognised that it was no good just creating a paper newsletter because that kind of defeated the object. So we made it electronic and we included all sorts of things in there because, you know, climate change is such a huge umbrella and it can be really kind of overwhelming to think, how can I as an individual make any kind of impact? So we covered things like what fruit and veg was in season and why it was important to buy locally and buy fruit and veg that's in season. Through to ideas of what you could do at home to reduce your own carbon footprint, what a carbon footprint actually is, because we recognise that many of our members didn't even understand, you know, that concept. And we also included examples of best practice, what employers were already doing, so we could share that and give ideas to others, and everything and anything in between. I did a lot of work visiting regional councils, talking to people about climate change, making sure that they understood that as the food industry, our emissions are ridiculously high through the nature of manufacturing, the uses of cooling and storage and distribution, and that in order for companies to become greener, lower their carbon footprint and emissions, changes are needed. But stressing that when they were needed, and this is why it's vitally a trade union issue, that our reps needed to be around the table, involved in the conversations, inputting ideas and challenging those that may impact on terms and conditions to ensure that our members and their workplaces didn't bear the brunt of any changes that were made. We also approached some of the employees that we deal with, asking them to recognise green reps, and in some cases, they kind of came back to us and said, well, we've got an environmental committee and we've trained them on this and we're doing that. So no, we're not going to add another level of trade union bureaucracy. That was a term that we heard a lot. And it was great that they have set up these environmental committees, but in workplaces where there were no reps on board, things were being agreed and talked about and discussed that weren't necessarily for the benefit of our members, it was just for the benefit of the employer. Some of them came back and said, yes, we'll work with you, and we're still kind of trying to get those voices around the tables. But one company that we had kind of a real breakthrough with, and you know, it's no coincidence that I worked there before I became an official, was Greggs. And we approached them and said about the green reps, and they did initially come back and say, look, we've got all these committees that we already have. Can we not work something into some of those structures rather than another separate one? And they have a she role, a she department. So they have the safety, health and environmental department. So they actually bit our hands off and said, we've been waiting for you as a trade union for years to come to us and say, can we do more environmental stuff? Quite embarrassingly so, but you know, we're there now and we're working with them. So we said that in the first instance we would extend the health and safety reps role, because we recognise until green reps are properly recognised as their own standalone rep, then we've got to do something to get us there. So utilising the health and safety reps, utilising ULRs, it's not ideal, but it's a step to get us where we need to be in many workplaces where they're not willing at the minute to recognise green reps. So we started having discussions with Greggs, and they actually worked with us. So whereas the other companies that had set up environmental committees and maybe used ISO 14001 as a management tool to train some people on how to deal with the environmental issues, Greggs actually worked with us to put some training together. So we initially trialled it with the national health and safety reps on the shop side, and we started off with a session around, you know, what is climate change, what is Greggs' carbon footprint and how has it worked out, how can you reduce your carbon footprint in your shop, and what impact does that have, timesing it by 2,500 shops. And the reps really engaged with it, and they came away and was like, this is amazing, can we not roll this out further to local reps? And we went on, we had 4 sessions altogether last year. We started off with that one, like an introduction. Then we looked at the energy monitor tool that they use and how to use that. We looked at waste, electricity and water, and then did kind of a catch-all at the end of anything that we thought that we'd missed out on or should focus on more. And they've started now, I mean, pre-COVID, the idea was this year we would roll it out to all the health and safety reps, but obviously we've kind of been put back a little bit with everything that's happened and the guys have been on furlough. But what it showed was that employers can work with us and can engage with us, and it benefits everybody. So they've got a group of people now that can go around to different shops and have conversations that aren't like managing them. You know, they're not area managers, they're not in to say, you've done this wrong, you've done that wrong, you must do this. But actually they're going around and talking to people about what they can do to make their shop more efficient. And like I say, they've really engaged, and surprisingly so. And that's kind of been infectious. So last year on the 24th of June, when the ITUC did the Climate Action Day, we had loads of Greggs people out. We had other members out as well because of the work that we've done, but the amount of Greggs people that took 10 minutes out of the dinner hour to go stand on a protest and wave their flag and say, we are with you, was phenomenal in comparison to where we were just a couple of years before, when people didn't even understand why it was a climate change, was a trade union issue. And this year we had conference, and I was dead proud of this, and unfortunately we couldn't hold conference because of COVID. We had more climate change and environmental motions than we've ever had before, including one calling for our union to have a Green Reps role in the rule book, and ensuring training happens, because we've not yet got a Green Reps course. We're working on putting one together with the GFTU, but it just goes to show, when you start talking to people about the issue and how it relates to them and how it impacts them, they can see that it is a trade union issue and it is something that we should be doing. And what I've also done as well is, because we don't yet have a Green Reps course, we have health and safety reps courses, and I've attended a number of those and just done a half-an-hour session as kind of an introductory. This is climate change, this is how you can expand your role initially and start conversations in your workplace about what you can do to reduce emissions without it impacting on your terms and conditions as members. And that's again helped to just kind of get the ball rolling, get people thinking about what role they can play in the workplace, but at home as well. Because if you're putting measures in place at work... Say again, sorry.
Just another 30 seconds.
All right, okay. So we've done all that. The ultimate aim is to get all the employees we work with together to do some kind of forum, to share best practice, to raise up the industry as a whole, because it's no good Greggs, Warburton's, Forbes that have got all these resources and all this money kind of being up here and being gold standard, but your small and medium businesses and your family-owned bakeries still being down here, or the supply chain still being massively bad, really, for the environment. And then just finally, you know, it's vital that we have our reps there as a voice to make sure that our members, whatever changes are needed, don't bear the brunt of any costs, and the employers know that they can't save their profits by making sure, you know, that our members' terms and conditions are strict as a result, because that doesn't help anyone. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Sarah. That was really inspiring and brilliant. Lots of thumbs up and clapping from the reactions buttons, and thank you very much indeed. So we're now going to move on to Ruth London, who is just doing all my paperless bit here, who is an organiser with Fuel Poverty Action, which is an organisation that works with tenants and residents and pensioners and others who are fighting for home, energy and heating systems that are both affordable and sustainable. And Ruth is going to focus on housing, heating, energy pricing and care at this time when everything's up in the air. What can we fight for and win? Ruth, I should have said this beforehand to Sarah. I'll give you notice when you've got just 1 minute left to go.
Thanks. Okay, plunging straight in on 3 things to fight for immediately: good housing, good heating, and fair pricing. Housing, in terms of recovery from the pandemic, it seems like everybody agrees that retrofitting energy efficiency in homes is the best thing you can do. Best for jobs, the best economic stimulus, brilliant against fuel poverty. Keeping warm is obviously crucial for our health, and it's best for the climate. Heating our homes accounts for 1/5 of our total emissions, so it's like a no-brainer. I have to say straight off that even better than retrofitting is building the homes right in the first place. I want to share my screen. I can't share the screen, but Lois, if you could get the first slide. It's a modern housing estate in Hillingdon called Pembroke Park, which is run by A2D Housing Association. Can you get it up? I can't pause, but this is a modern estate. And we've been working with the Residents Association there for 6 years now, and it looks idyllic. You know, some of it just houses. Can people see it? No? Some of it low blocks, but it's all what you'd call like Instagrammable real estate, right? But they left the insulation out. And A2 Dominion, the landlords, have actually admitted to residents that they're, and I quote, heating the street. And the Residents Association has fought and fought to get retrofits, and they managed to get insulation in one flat where there was a very ill child in a freezing cold bedroom who was actually in danger of dying. And they got letters from Great Ormond Street Children's Hospital, and they made a legal challenge, and in the end, A2D insulated that one flat, not the rest. And this estate is not an exception. The standard of new builds is often really appalling. Now that there are no more local authority surveyors on site, the developers basically rule the roost, and they have ruled legislation as well. So they got rid of the zero carbon homes policy in 2015, and now it looks like the future home standard will allow homes from 2025 onwards that will then require more work later to bring them up to standard. It costs 5 times as much to retrofit as it does to get it right to start off. Anyway, a week ago, as a virus recovery measure, the government committed to this £2 billion for retrofits for 1 year. For 1 year, that's a lot. And their manifesto promises 9.2 billion over this parliament. We'll need to hold them to that. But we need to put the money in context. First of all, there's the £29 billion roads budget. Then there's the fact that the 2 billion is basically for homeowners and landlords, not for renters. Social housing is supposed to get another big dollop later, but the private tenants aren't being promised anything. And then there are quite big question marks over what the standard's going to be for the retrofits that they do, because it's a voucher scheme. Individuals will get half their costs covered for efficiency measures, or all of their costs if they're on a low income, up to £10,000. But that can leave us at the mercy of doorstep salesmen. It doesn't look like, we're fighting for it, but it doesn't look like our homes will be getting the deep assessment that should be done before embarking on any retrofit to find out what's actually going to make a difference and what might actually make things worse. And again, you can't do the second screen either, can you? I was hoping to show you the website of Civali, which is an organization of victims of cavity wall insulation, CIVALLI. And cavity wall insulation is one of the main things in the retrofit toolkit, but loads of homes end up really damp and full of mold. Hooray! And because the cavity was there for a purpose, it was keeping water out, and the water would run down in the cavity, but they take that away. And it's not only door-to-door guys that are ending up wrecking people's homes. It's cowboys like Ryden, you know, the ones that retrofitted in Grenfell Tower, and it's the materials, because most of them are based on plastic, and the plastics industry, which is closely wrapped up with the oil and fracking industries, all totally unsustainable, of course. They've been at the heart of policy making on building standards for decades, and that is in fact what led to the fire at Grenfell Tower. So we need insulation, but we need natural materials and community-based retrofits with accountability to residents, and we need them at scale. That is not what's being offered now, but the billions do open things up that we can fight for. Okay, I'm going to touch briefly on heating. We urgently need to be replacing natural gas, and not with hydrogen. We can discuss that later. In most places, that means harvesting heat from the environment via heat pumps. They're a bit controversial. Some people say theirs are really noisy and they're huge and they're expensive to run and they don't work when it's cold out. Others say they don't have to be that way, and they aren't in other countries. One of the best possibilities looks like being combining heat pumps with heat networks, which are also known as district heating. And district heating is like central heating for a whole block or a state or district. It can be very good, but in the UK, heat networks have been like heat pumps in the UK, often a disaster. Constant breakdowns, hot water running cold. In Pembroke Park, again, they got a biomass boiler put in to get past planning permission. Never worked. They fought and got it changed to gas, I'm afraid. But they're still in constant crisis. And recently, one block recorded 16 heating outages in 6 months. And you can imagine what that does to your daily life. And the costs of district heating can also be much more, and you can't switch. So we've worked with tenants and residents associations, TRAs, all over London with that kind of problem. And if you're interested, we have a detailed report on what happened in Myatt's Field in Lambeth. Can you do the next picture? This is residents organizing on that estate, and it's been a long battle there. The key issue is always empowering TRAs, and instead the tenants and residents are being systematically disempowered, despite the Hackett report saying that was what's actually needed to keep people safe. I'm just going to mention solar because I'm going to run out of time. We can come back to it. But all of these measures, like the heat networks, the heat pumps, the solar panels, they could all be transformative, but not the way they're being done now. The last focus is on pricing and protection for people who can't pay their bills. Before COVID, people were there rationing their heat or going hungry to pay the bills, and 10,000 people a year were already dying because they couldn't afford to heat their homes. And that is going to explode next winter and probably the coming years. I don't suppose you can share, there's an End Fuel Poverty Coalition petition about that. With the pandemic and the unemployment, I think, you know, we won't know what's hit us, basically. It's really, really worrying these coming years, winters. And Fuel Poverty Action have been working on a proposal that would basically upend the way that energy pricing works now. Because at the moment, because the standing charge is always there, however little we actually use, we pay more per unit if we use less energy. Whether we cut down because we can't afford it or because of climate change, we don't get the full benefit of that cut down. And we're exploring how it could work if instead there was a band of energy that was always there to cover basic needs like heat, hot water, running a fridge. And that band would actually be free for everyone, which would mean the prices would have to go up a lot on usage, which is over that basic amount, to help cover the cost, but also to deter waste so that people don't leave all the lights on in their mansions. A big question is what that would mean for people who need more, not because they're wasteful, but because of their age or their health or because of bad housing, heating the streets. So we're looking at how this reverse pricing system could be combined with an energy efficiency program and maybe solar panels to produce extra power for people who need more. But the bottom line is that pricing needs to change. It's a time of real insecurity. We can't count on our own health. We can't count on our incomes. We need to keep warm. And also there's international insecurity, which can mean prices are volatile as well. So we would really welcome your views on this. We have had positive responses at the Pensioners' Parliament that the NPC organises, from social housing residents we've discussed it with. We raised it a year ago with Caroline Lucas's office, and they came back to us at the beginning of COVID to ask us about it as a possible recovery policy. We've also had interest from the Labour Party, from the EU's Economic and Social Committee. The Green New Deal for Europe has incorporated it in their fantastic blueprint. I would really recommend that you look at the blueprint for Green New Deal for Europe. It's better than anything we have here, I think.
Ruth, if you could be winding up, that would be great.
Okay, I am, yes. But we are actively looking for help and support to develop this idea. Fuel Poverty Action is very small, we're unfunded, and we're really dependent on our allies. So we hope you'll back us up on some of this, not just the pricing proposal, but also the local and national campaigns on housing and heating as well. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ruth. And you know, everything you were saying was ringing bells. In particular, the terrible cavity wall insulation. We did a report on cold, damp and mouldy homes at City Hall on the Environment Committee last year, which I'll send you a link to after the meeting. And I was actually going to say to everyone, we will make sure we circulate Ruth's slides, and I'm sorry we couldn't resolve the technical issue of how to display them. Ruth was having problems sharing her screen when we were in the pre-meet, and we thought we'd fixed it with Lois sharing them for her, but clearly it didn't work. But we'll send them all round by email after the meeting. So I would now like to introduce our third speaker, who is Julian Dean. And Julian is a Green Party councillor on Shropshire Council. He works for the Green Party to support our councillors on climate action. And he's going to be focusing on why a just green recovery must have local communities and better democracy at its heart. Julian, I will try and alert you when you've just got 1 minute left to go, and you've got 10 minutes starting now.
Okay, I'll try not to take up those 10 minutes because I'm just aware that we're running short. So, and also some of the arguments have already been made, which is fantastic. So, yeah, so my job is to try and talk to you about the role of local democracy and why that is so central to this story. And I think it's worth, first of all, posing the two contrasting routes that we could be going down in terms of green recovery and whether it's going to be socially just and whether it's going to address climate action. And what we know is that the route that Boris Johnson wants to take us down is going to be more centralist and corporatist and privatized and anti-democratic. And actually Ruth has just outlined that in terms of the story of you know, corporate-led work on retrofitting and on buildings and the horrible stories of Grenfell Tower and all that sort of stuff. We know that if it's left in corporate hands, that it's going to be a disaster, that it's going to be bad for people, that it isn't going to address the climate properly, and it certainly isn't going to be socially just. And we know that that's continued to be the story, the fact that Deloitte has been running the test and trace thing badly, the fact that, you know, that they went to, their first choice was to go to Dyson to get more ventilators, which never happened. Okay, so we know that's the threat. Against that, we are posing the idea that you can do these things democratically, you can do it locally led, you can do it with local energy, and that actually will meet all the targets. It will meet the climate action targets, it will meet the social justice targets, and it will empower people. So that, if you like, that's my conclusion. So I could stop there, but I won't. I will fill it out a little bit. So just to take some of the examples. So we know there are basically 5 areas where there's a need for climate action, emissions action. We need to transform our energy systems so that they no longer use fossil fuels. We need to transform our transport infrastructure and the way we do transport so that it is no longer dependent on fossil fuels. We need to, as has already been explained, transform the way we heat and power our homes and workplaces so that, again, they're no longer reliant on fossil fuels. We need to transform the way we manage land so that it becomes a carbon sink rather than an emitter of greenhouse gases. And then we need to deal with the stuff, all the stuff that we buy, all the stuff that we consume, and that's about making sure that that enters some sort of a cycle, which means that those materials are not wasted, are not going in a one-way direction from being used with all the energy involved and all the materials involved, simply going into landfill or furnaces at the end of a very short lifetime, that they go into a circular economy. So those are the big 5 areas for climate action. But they can all be addressed in a local way. So I won't cover them all, but let's leap to, so I won't talk about housing because Ruth's done that. So let's talk about transport a little bit. So what we know in terms of the social justice agenda is that there is a huge story around access to transport and social justice. Even the government itself has said, and this is amazing when you think about the history going back to Thatcher and the car is king culture, even they have said increasing car dependency has led to increasing unfairness. We know that in social housing, for example, a majority of households don't have access to a car. I imagine the situation in London is probably even more the case, although equally London has a better story in terms of public transport. But for sort of middle-sized towns like I live in, public transport is shit, to be crude about it, and still we have people who don't have access to a car. We also know, I think an important part of that story is that we know that even within a household with a car, not everybody has access to the car keys. The younger members of the household may well not have learned to drive. The women in the house may not have access to the car keys whilst the bloke is taking it to work. So there's a whole story around social justice in transport. So we know that therefore the modal shift that we need in terms of making walking and cycling accessible choices for people, and then making public transport an accessible choice for people, as opposed to is about social justice, and as well as about reducing the carbon emissions. But we also know that is a local story. It's a place-based story, isn't it? Transport. It's about places. It's about how you design places. So it has to be a local story, and therefore it has to be about planning and all that sort of thing. And again, we're in this battle. The government is trying to the build speech we saw from Boris Johnson was absolutely saying that we're going to try and do away with elements of local democratic control over planning. He was talking about increasing the ability to do I've forgotten the term. Anyway, uncontrolled planning, where you basically don't have to get permission, and a lot of that is going to happen in cities. It's conversion of office blocks into flats without the required affordable housing allocations, without the social space, without the green space allocations. So it's, and without the control over energy efficiency that the local authority could potentially have. So democratic control as opposed to corporate control is the only way to make sure that those things happen, both well in terms of carbon emissions, but also well in terms of social justice, so that we can actually make sure there is the affordable housing, that there is the access to green space, and all of those things. That's why local democracy is absolutely central to all of these different areas, and it does actually extend even to the local to renewable energy. So renewable energy is not just about putting wind farms in the North Sea. It also has to be about local renewable energy, partly because the grid simply cannot cope if we just produce it all in one way from one location. We absolutely, in terms of the energy mix, we need local energy generation, and that requires some very local detailed work, and it's tricky. It's tricky in terms of the economics. Rolling out community energy is tricky because basically you need to be covering enough places, enough sites, enough homes, enough workplaces, so that you can take risk, because some of those places won't be able to pay. So so there's difficulties. But again, the only way you're going to get to that sort of model, which the corporates aren't going to be able to do and aren't going to be interested in doing, is through a community approach. And that requires local democracy and local councils to support that. And it requires, setting up models for community investment. And that is all out there. There are examples of all this sort of stuff. But again, it just makes the point that local democracy is the way to drive it. And then finally, just on the circular economy, I'll just give the example from my own county. So we've just heard that they're going to, the Shropshire County Council is going to move out of Shire Hall, this big sort of 60s building, which is relatively inefficient. Now, that's probably good news. We have to be careful. We have to measure it carefully. If we've got lots of people working at home during a winter in not very well insulated homes, there's a risk that actually the energy use will be considerably more than working in one building. But nevertheless, there's potential. And that requires all sorts of things like retrofitting those council workers' homes and doing perhaps salary release schemes. But also that is a way to then encourage local circular economy type and local wealth creation, what gets called community wealth creation, local companies that can begin to do that work. Similarly, with the old Shire Hall, do we just lock it down and give it to a corporate developer to deal with? Or do we say, right, here's an opportunity to set up some local SMEs who will deal with, who will begin to build a circular economy locally, so they can deal with recycling the materials. There are going to be some very usable materials in that building which could be used for other buildings. There's a real opportunity there to develop some circular economy ways of thinking, but that needs local thought. It needs the economic development team in Shropshire not to go off to Cannes, which it does every year, to try and bring in the corporates who will then disappear again, but to stay in Shropshire and to talk to local people and to start developing those local firms which can take on some of that work. Finally, I think what that all tells us, one of the things that my experience tells me that's really interesting, is that, you know, if you think about the populist monolith that Boris Johnson represents, where are the chinks in its armour? Actually, I have local Tory councillors who get that it makes sense to do local community wealth building and not give the corporations all the rights. They know in Shropshire Council that having the highways dealt with by a big multinational called Kia has been a disaster. They've actually started going to local farmers and asking them to fill in the potholes because they do it better and they actually care because they've got to drive on those roads. So there is a real, you know, so there is, even within the Tory, within conservative thought, if you like, there is a tension between that sort of corporatist, centralist, anti-democratic thing, which is absolutely the Johnson road, Cummins road, and local conservatives who get that a bit of local wealth building makes sense, who get that, you know, to talk again about Shropshire, local villages, local towns, if they're going to be sustainable, there has to be affordable housing. There has to be somewhere for younger families to be able to live. And that has to not be car dependent because they don't want to clog up their towns and villages with yet more traffic. So people get that story. And I think that's interesting in terms of where those audiences are. Now, I know I'm talking about, you know, the Shropshire audience. I can see you waving. So, okay.
Coming towards an end.
So the final piece in the jigsaw of all that, where the hope comes, is just, and I will finish on this point, is that the COVID-19 experience of community solidarity, I think, gives us, you know, gives us a bit of hope in terms of pushing that local democratic message and using that to try and win this. You know, we are right in the middle right now of this battle about which direction we go out of this. Is it the corporatist centralist road or is it the local democratic road? And so, yeah, so I will leave it there.
Julian, thank you very much indeed. And I mean, it's very good timing to be, for all of us to be reminded about the importance of local democracy and council level activity, because we have our council elections coming up in London in 2022. So now is the moment when all our local parties all across London are selecting target candidates and are beginning to really get working full on with their target to win campaigns. And getting Green councillors elected means that there is a chance to have a voice in the room that is going to make sure that we get good decisions made around the recovery. And I think, you know, we're going to be, you know, what we've lived through over the last 4 months is just a tiny foretaste of the massive scale of impact that this pandemic is going to have on all our lives. And so thinking long term about that recovery and how we can engage with it with that kind of local democracy starting point rather than the big corporates is absolutely absolutely spot on. Now we have lots and lots of questions that have been coming in. So, oh my goodness, I have a Google Doc that is full of questions that have all been carefully collated from the now I've got one question here which is actually a question for everyone potentially, which is comes from Nick Faraday, and it is, what can we say to trade unionists who are supporting bailouts to the aviation industry so they get back to business as usual, i.e. growth, when that industry can by itself wreck any zero carbon budget? So would anyone like to, maybe between Ruth, Sarah and Julian, if you sort of indicate to me if you'd like to answer that question. Sarah, would you like to? Yeah, go for it.
I think we need to kind of focus the conversation around a just transition, but recognise that there's a lot of fear on the back of what happened in the mining industry when that was kind of gotten rid of and decimated communities. Some, you know, not very far from me, have not yet recovered from that. So I think there's a lot of fear about how can we make change without people ending up on the scrap heap, so to speak, because that's exactly what happened back then. And I think one thing that I've said at a few TUC conferences where we've been moving motions and different unions have not supported them because, you know, their members work in the energy industry is, yes, we're here to protect jobs, but when did that become at all costs? You know, and we have to really look at the impact and the wider impact. You know, I know there's unions that represent members in the fracking industry. We have a stance against fracking, you know, and I appreciate that they've got members that work there, but, you know, that industry becoming more prevalent will directly impact our members' industry by not being able to produce food because the water table gets impacted. So, you know, there's got to be a balance. But we've worked with Campaign Against Climate Change along with a number of other unions to create the 1 Million Climate Jobs booklet. I don't know if you've seen it. If you haven't, it's well worth having a look through because there's all sorts of ideas in there. And I think it really does kind of give food for thought. You know, how we engage with these unions, how we engage with the workers and the members within them and talk to them about a just transition, and that change is possible without them losing the skill set, losing the income, losing the terms and conditions that they have, but making a change.
Great, thank you very much, Sarah. There's so many questions. I think we should just have one person answering each one. So I'm going to now come back with a question for Ruth. Which is, someone's asking, David Farby is asking, what are the chances of getting the Passive House standard adopted in the UK? Is it greater than zero?
Look, the chances of everything depend on how much force we can mobilize. And frankly, nobody knows what's going to happen now. You know, the world was trolling along, and then there was COVID, and then there was Black Lives Matter. You know, there's been the yellow vest. There's been things that people never expected, and we just don't know what can happen. Passive House standard, I see there's somebody on the call here. Tom Woolley knows much more about that than I do. We're, as I say, we're a small unfunded group, and we are not experts on every aspect. But I must say that in terms of getting things done, financially, this is the best investment the government could make, is in retrofitting and making homes warm. You know, the money comes back round. They cannot say the money isn't there. It needs to be done at scale. It needs to be planned and not done in a patchy way where, you know, this company sees an opportunity to make some money there, here, and that company makes some money there. So it needs to be organized properly. It needs to be done on a community basis, with involving people from the community and in the houses in their own decisions about what happens to their homes. There was another question on the in the chat asking about what's happened with cladding. where leaseholders are being asked to pay enormous sums to get cladding off their building that they never put on. And of course, the money shouldn't come from them. And of course, it should be gotten from landlords who, you know, let's face it, with these tower blocks, these are not little individual landlords. These are mostly, you know, huge corporations hiding their money away from taxes and some, you know, account somewhere. And they might be hard to get hold of, but if the government committed to putting houses right, and there's still loads and loads of homes that are clad in ACM and other flammable materials, petrochemicals, if they committed to doing it, they could then get the money back from the landlords. It should be up to them to get it back, not up to individual leaseholders, and certainly not up to social housing tenants who are in some cases being classed as private and still happen to have their ACM cladding off. And, you know, people are going to sleep with a Bible by their head in case, you know, because they don't know if they're going to wake up. Yeah,
Ruth, that's a great answer. I'm going to move on to another question so that we keep going round with the questions. So I'm going to bring in a question for Julian, which is from Shona Mountford, who says, I entirely agree with the principle of local democracy, but how do we increase participation at a local level? The argument would be far more compelling if turnout for local elections was not so low. So Julian, do you have any comments on that one?
I think that it's where to begin. I think people will vote when they feel that something's going to change, and so we have to offer something that is real, that is going to provide that opportunity for change, and then build it up. You know, we just to sort of, you know, big up the way that Green Party councillors do that. We start from the local, we start from the immediate, we start from people's actual experiences, and we have proved in lots of places. And you know, Solihull is a great example, and Birmingham, where we have won seats in a whole range of different types of wards with different demographics, because we are prepared to talk about the local issues and engage people on that. So you know, so I think that you know, you just have to start from where you are. In terms of increasing participation, yes, it would be great to increase our participation, but I also think there is a strong argument for saying that, you know, if you have 50% engaged, actually you go with that. Because, you know, because those people do have the potential to be a strong voice, to help drive change, and we need the change. So we can't wait around for 80% of people to start voting. So I think we just have to go with what we can. But I do think we have a track record of engaging local people and drawing them into this sort of thing.
Thank you. I'm now going to bring another question for Sarah. We've got it's great to hear such good news from your union. I just wondered, how confident are you that Greggs is not just trying to promote itself? How genuine is its mission here?
So, I worked for Greggs for 13 years before I became a union official, so I kind of saw the work that they do inside as well as seeing what they advertise outside externally. And I'm very privileged in the position that I'm now in to see a lot more of the work that they do. There's an awful lot that Greggs do that they don't advertise, and kind of the environmental work and the green stuff, as we refer to it, is something that they don't push out there. You know, how many of you on the call know about all the breakfast clubs that they support and local charities that they support in the background with their foundation that employees and raising money through customers put into? The fact that when they were charging for the plastic carrier bags, they made an environmental fund that local communities and groups could request donations to support environmentally friendly campaigns and things like that. It's not stuff that they advertise. There is stuff that they do advertise. They're a company at the end of the day, but I think they don't push a lot of the stuff that they do because they do it for the right reasons rather than doing it just to bring more people in. you know. If you compare them to like some McDonald's, where it's all, we fuel our trucks by oil and this, that and the other, which isn't quite as simple as that, and it's not as straightforward as that. They kind of, it's not all like a fake front, whereas Craigs do a lot of work that they don't advertise. They're still a business though at the end of the day.
You'd have thought I'd have worked out how to use the unmute button by now. Thank you, Sarah. That's really helpful. Ruth, another question about, well, there's two questions I'm actually going to give you at the same time. There's one about how is the current UK building standard compliant with EU Energy Performance of Buildings Directive 2018, which came from Ina Balick. You may or may not know the answer to that, so don't worry if you don't. The other one is, we do need retrofitting for buildings which already exist. How do you think this is best done? That's from Rebecca Warren. Would you like to have a go at that one?
Well, I think I kind of answered that one. I've seen it and I put it together with what I was saying before.
Okay, in which case, the other question, which was around housing, sorry, I'm just scrolling through this massive document of questions. Oh no, there's an interesting question that's actually come from Tom Woolley about is the Green Party willing to support the development and promotion of natural insulation materials like hemp, hempcrete, wool, wood fibre, instead of petrochemical flammable foams? Now, Tom Woolley, I'd be really happy if you wrote to me at City Hall at caroline.russell@london.gov.uk with more information about this, because that's absolutely something I could push forward through the Environment Committee. But if you, but Ruth, I don't know if you've got any thoughts about those natural insulation materials.
I think it's vital, and one aspect of it is the sustainability of the production of the petrochemical insulation, the insulation and cladding. You know, it's not only the fact that they're flammable and that they're extremely toxic, especially not only when they burn, but also, you know, if we're really going for zero carbon, you can't be producing. It's like from fracking, a lot of it's from fracking, that goes huge boats the size of football fields carrying oil from the United States over to, you know, to get cracked and turned into plastic. You know, all of that is not really sustainable. So, you know, there aren't any magic bullets, but certainly, you know, looking at the hemp and the other materials is something that's absolutely vital for us to do now. I did want to answer another question, though, which had been put to me previously about regeneration, because that's something that's going on all over London at scale, and it is generally a disaster. You know, even if the homes are better insulated than the old ones, it's really bad for the climate because of the embodied carbon. So it's crazy that that is 20% for retrofits and only 5% if you're knocking down homes and rebuilding them, or buying a Big Mac, of course. That's, you know, to be promoted as well, but retrofits are not. So, you know, for people living there, it also has another cost, which is people lose their care networks. And it's really bad for young families, but it's worse for pensioners because it's actually unsafe to be cut off from family members and neighbors that you've built up a relationship with for decades. And with the pandemic, you know, it's much more recognized of how essential caring work is. So maybe that's a new pressure point for local authorities and developers, you know, against regeneration. And while I'm mentioning care, you know, care work is not only done by low-paid health and care home workers. You know, even more of it is done unpaid, you know, like caring for our children and grandchildren. And one reason why women pensioners and women generally are so badly off is all that unpaid work that we do all our lives. And payment for that work has been demanded for a really long time by grassroots women around the world. And FPA actually, as policy, are backing that call. you know, as part of our mission of turning the economy upside down, you know, payment for caring work would be a good beginning. And that's also in the Green New Deal for Europe that I referred to before. They have a special COVID program, and prominent in it is payment for caring work. So I'd really encourage people, it'll be in the slides that Lois sends. I'd really encourage people to follow that link.
Thank you. And I think just the whole way that, you know, the way everyone's lives have been turned upside down over this last 4 months, and, you know, seeing people coping with their caring responsibilities and with doing their jobs, their office jobs online, has been, I think, a real eye-opener for so many people. And whether we can come through the other side of this whole situation that we're in a way that kind of acknowledges caring responsibilities and actually enables people to spend time working, but also to spend time caring and doing other things. And, you know, it'll be the mark of how successful we all are at campaigning, as to whether we manage to transform things for the better, or whether we end up kind of, you know, stuck in business as usual. But thank you for that answer, Ruth. Julian, there's a question for you about, do you know Power for the People, which is a campaign for the local electricity bill? This is a question from Rebecca Warren. And it's about a local electricity bill to enable residential and community energy to sell power to their neighbours. Do you know anything about this? Do you have any comments on it?
I'm afraid I don't know much about it, but what I have done is I have, because I remember the campaign coming forward, and certainly as councillors we got a lot of emails about it. So I spoke to somebody locally who's involved in energy co-ops and also in fuel poverty work, and they felt that the particular bill that was coming forward was not a core piece of work that they felt was necessarily useful. But to be honest, it's because of that, and because it went past, I'm not an expert on it. So yeah, sorry.
Don't worry at all, and thank you for being clear and quick. Another question for Sarah, which is about food waste programs and solutions to deal effectively with the emissions arising from food decaying in landfills. So this is another question from Ina Balik, and it's about diverting food waste from landfill to having it treated in anaerobic digesters, and just wondering if if that's anything that you've done any work on at all, in terms of encouraging the businesses that you're working with to treat their food waste as part of the circular economy.
We've not got very far with doing work on that. That was part of getting the businesses all round together. We did have a presentation from BIFA that worked with Greg's and a couple of the other national companies that we work with, who divert almost 100% of the supply side waste away from landfill in different means. And that was kind of what sparked the idea of getting all the employees that we deal with together to share best practice and share knowledge around that, and, you know, even to a degree of sharing contracts if possible with contractors like them, to make sure that as much food waste is diverted from landfill as possible. It's very difficult with kind of the raw dough and things like that, but a lot of the companies do a lot of reworking process to make sure that there's as minimal waste in that sense as possible as well. With regards to dealing effectively with emissions arising from food decaying in landfills, I can't answer that question. We've not done any work around that, but you've raised it, and it's something that I'll go away and look at, and maybe we could do some work with employees going forward with it.
That's brilliant, thank you. I've just seen the time, it's 1 minute past 8, and I was meant to be wrapping up and inviting our speakers to do their 2-minute sum up for the end. So Sarah, you've just answered a question, so I'm going to give you a gap, and I'm going to invite Ruth to do her 2 minutes to sum up.
I might be quicker than that, actually. I think it's very discouraging to fight in a time when it's so hard to win anything. And, you know, we work with people all the time on housing estates where they really feel they're banging their heads against the brick wall. But tell that to Black Lives Matter, you know, that it's hard. Of course it's bloody hard. And of course we can get victories. And with housing and heating in particular, I do think we have a real chance now. You know, not least because of what's happening in the streets, and because the government are worried. You know, I hope I don't take too much of my 2 minutes, but I happen to see a note, people who have district heating centers telling each other to be careful and make sure of security, because there could be attacks on the centers, like physical attacks with what's happening with COVID. You know, they are expecting an uprising, and we should have that in mind as well. On warm homes, what we need now is a battering ram, and we have what could be the basis of one. You know, there's so many people in organizations working on this, you know, local sustainability, XR groups, the big national fuel poverty lobby, energy lobbyists, local authorities, individual councillors, housing groups, tenants and residents associations, and trade unions have been involved with us in the SKIN campaign, which is Safe Cladding and Insulation Now. A lot of trade unions supported that, and can be very much involved in fighting not only for what goes on in the workplace, but Sarah, I hope that maybe your union will consider thinking about not only what individual people can do in their own homes, but what they can fight for to be done for their homes. We need to be careful what we wish for. I know Tom's flagged up some dangers in terms of passive house and in terms of the materials. We need to be careful what we wish for in terms of standards and materials, because we do not need more Grenfell towers. But if we can gather our forces, I think we do have an opportunity now for breakthroughs, you know, on climate and poverty and health and social justice.
Brilliant. Thank you very much, Ruth. And that's a sort of message of hope at the end. So that's great. Thank you. I'm now going to pass to Julian for your up to 2 minutes to sum up.
Nicely put. So just 2 points then. First is about the pace of change. So, you know, one of the things that's been very interesting, I've sat in on a load of webinars in my role over the last few weeks and months. And one of the things that's been interesting hearing from people in local government is that the amount of energy and enthusiasm that weirdly that came out of this crisis, where people have suddenly done things that they thought they might do at some stage, but suddenly they've done it quickly. They set up partnerships with local food hubs, with mutual aid groups to make sure that the vulnerable are being looked after. They've had to find a way of working with also, you know, with other local authorities, with the healthcare people, with social care, in a way that hadn't happened before. So there's been the proof is there that you can do things quickly with energy. It needs political will. That's the missing ingredient. And where the political will is there, then things move much more quickly. And the rate of change and the rate of development in local authorities is so variable, and you can only explain that by the political will. And sometimes that political will can come just from having 1 or 2 Green councillors in the room, as I'm sure Carolyn can tell you. You know, we do have that experience, and it's quite magic, actually, that effect of getting a Green councillor involved. The last thing I just wanted to say was it was great to hear from Sarah, and it was great to hear you talk about how it's so important to make sure that it's a just transition. But I think the bit on top of the just transition is the whole Green New Deal story, is saying to workers, you know, yes, we want to protect your conditions, we want to make sure that you go into a skilled job, but actually the Green New Deal is about everybody's life. It's about their grandparents, it's about their kids, it's about the clean air that their kids can go to school in. It's all of those things. And I think that message has to be, you know, the trade unions can play such an important role, especially in a world of fake news, to be beginning to get that story out to members, so that when they are faced with a difficult decision, because there will be some difficult decisions, that they're doing it in the context of the bigger picture.
Julian, thank you very much. Bang on 2 minutes. That was perfect timing. And finally, Sarah, if you would like to sum up for 2 minutes, that would be great.
Thank you. I won't be 2 minutes. I've put my email address in the chat box if anybody wants to get in contact. I know there's some questions that we didn't manage to answer. I'm quite happy to carry on the dialogue afterwards. But what I would say is, as devastating as COVID has been for people of our country and our nation, and the UK as a whole, it offers us an opportunity to make sure that we have change going forward. You know, we know that the government can put money into things if they want, and we need to work together, you know, as a movement to force those changes, to share ideas, to work with each other and support each other, because there is only us that's going to force these changes. The Tory government have got no intention of moving away from their blueprint, and will keep attacking us as people, and we need to work together to make sure that when we come out of COVID, the future is better than what we've had in the past.
Thank you very, very much, Sarah. And if everyone could show their appreciation with some of the reaction clapping, that would be fantastic. Thank you to all three of our speakers. It's been a really interesting conversation, and thank you to everyone who has contributed questions, and apologies to anyone whose question didn't get answered, but if we can hopefully save the questions, and if there's anything that didn't get answered, we can possibly try and get you an email response from the relevant speaker. Now, we have one final item of business. So if any of the speakers, you really don't have to stay for the Green Party business, although you're very welcome to stay if you would like to. But please feel free to switch off your screen and have a cup of tea and have a break. Thank you so much to all three of you. Thank you.